A long time ago, we here at Comicstorian used to bring you weekly independent books or other publishers, things such as Image, Valiant, and truly independent people who are trying to bring you books of their own. We did this so that you could discover new stuff in the comic book industry that you might get excited about that isn't the mainstream. But at some point, we kind of started doing way too many of them, and we had to reel back and go back to just DC and Marvel. Well, today we're going to start doing independent books again, and we're going to kick it off today with a Darby Pop Publishing book known as Indestructible. So let me ask you this. Have you ever wanted to be a superhero in a world filled with superheroes? Well, what if you were a superhero because of a mistake, and everyone assumed you had powers, but you didn't? Just imagine how weird that would be. Our story begins in Central California at a woman's correctional facility. The woman, Kelly, known by her supervillain name Stingray, is just released after serving her time. As she walks out, a black car pulls up, and the driver gets out to open the door for her. When Kelly looks in, she notices an empty seat and scoffs, stating, even after doing her time, the bastard can't even bother to show up. The driver says that he wanted to take her home right away, and Kelly walks off stating that Saddam was never her home. The driver sighs, telling her fine. He'll tell him that he never saw her, but at least take this money and contact info for a guy. Small-time work that'll help her get by. She takes the note and says that she hopes that he doesn't take this the wrong way, but she hopes to never see him again, and then throws the piece of paper away. Later that night, though, Greg heads out to West Hollywood to meet with his date, Desiree, so that they can head to the club. As the two stand in line, Desiree says that he said he knew someone, and he's really short. Greg tells her, actually, he's average height, and he does know someone. They just happen to not be working tonight. Desiree pulls out a flask and drinks the last bit of booze before tossing it to Greg, telling him to give her his keys. She's got something stronger in the car. Just then, the crowds begin to whisper, asking if it's really him, and outside of the line, a handsome young hero, Jake Blaze, walks by everyone as the bouncers let him in. Just before entering, Jake turns back to the crowd and he points at Desiree, stating her too. As she walks up, Greg follows, yelling, "Wait! I'm with her." And Jake stops him, telling him, "I'm sorry, but she's with me now." Jake then brushes Greg off by creating an explosion in his hand. Greg yells, "Come on, she has the keys!" So, with no other option, Greg heads home and his roommate Barry asks how it went. Greg tells him, the same as always. "Wait, those games were supposed to be returned this morning." Barry says, "Yeah, about that. It's 11:45 and the store closes at 12, so chop chop. Remember homecoming?" Greg grabs the games, asking how long is he gonna hold that over his head? And Barry says, forever. Also, see if they have Madden. At 12:02, Greg arrives at the video store after they've closed, and the cashier opens the door, and Greg says, "You must be new here, Kathy." Kathy tells him, yeah, she's sure in a few weeks she'll be immune to the pleads of people banging their heads on the doors after hours. She then returns the games, and Greg asks if they also happen to have a copy of Madden. She pulls out a copy, stating, good thing she saved one for her brother, but he's a jerk, so he can have it. Greg laughs, telling them that's awesome, his brother's a jerk too, and then the door opens. Kathy turns, telling the two men that they are closed, and two men with guns shout, "Open the register!" She tells them that she's already logged out. The cash is in the safe, which is also on a timer. And the other gunman shouts, "She's lying!" And Greg nervously shuffles in the way of the gunman, and he quietly tells him, stop. The gunman asks, "What did you say?" And Greg says, just stop. The gunman stares at Greg and he fires, and Kathy watches as Greg's body hits the ground and she faints. The two gunmen run out, and as Greg lays there, he starts to open up his eyes. He gets up grabbing the game and he makes his way back home. As he gets home, Barry sees the game and he jumps over the couch to kiss him for getting it, and then he notices something's off. He reaches into Greg's jacket and he pulls out the flask that Desiree gave him, which happened to catch the bullet. The next morning, Greg slowly wakes up looking in the mirror to see a bruise on his chest. He runs out of his room and wakes up Barry, asking what happened to him last night. He was at a club with Desiree and they hit it off. Barry tells him, "No, you didn't. You came home and you returned some games for me." Greg says, "That's right, there was a girl and two a-holes with guns." And Barry says, "That would explain the bullet hole in your jacket." Greg tells him, "Wait, what?" Barry goes on, asking him, "When did you start drinking out of a flask?" And then the news on the TV starts to report on the late night robbery at the local video store. While the female clerk suffered minor injuries, the security cameras captured the superhero in action, stopping the bullet, and then left the scene. As the image zooms in, Barry says, "Hey, it's you!" You know what this means. My friend is a superhero. And Greg tells him, No, I am not a superhero. Barry falls to his knees, begging for him to not ruin this for him, even just a little. Greg says fine, he can live with it until lunch. He needs to go get his keys from Desiree anyway. A little while later, Desiree stops by to pick up Greg to get his car, but as they drive by the garage where Greg is parked, he says that they kinda missed it, and he needs to get to work. Desiree tells him it'll be fine, he's not gonna need it for a few hours. And for a long time, she's been searching for a man of stone. Soon, the two pull up to Desiree's apartment, and Greg says that she can just give him his keys now, but Desiree pushes Greg into the bed, unbuttoning his shirt to see the bruise, telling him, "Whoa!" However, as she does that, Greg notices a burn on Desiree's wrist and asks what happened. She tells him Jake Blaze. Apparently, he doesn't like to be told no. And then again, neither does she. After 30 minutes later, the two lay in bed, and Greg asks, "So, you're a superhero groupie or something? Not that I mind or anything." anything. Before long, there's a knock at the door and a voice shouting, "Open up! Police!" Desiree runs to the bathroom as Greg starts to put his pants on, and then he opens up the door. The officers run in telling Greg to get to the ground, and Greg tells him that he's sorry, he's gonna come clean, but the other officer shouts, "Mace him!" And they unload a whole can of pepper spray into his face. Later at the police station, Greg wipes the tears out of his eyes, stating that there has been a huge misunderstanding, and one of the investigators says that she's gone over his report, and he is not registered with the FBI. All superheroes are required to register with the FBI. Greg tells them, "Look, I'm not a superhero. I'm not even strong. Just arm wrestle me." And then the door flies open and a man walks in telling Greg to not say another word to these wolves. The rather short man walks in telling the officers that him and Mr. Pincus will be leaving right now. The male investigator tells the man to hang on there, shortstop. Without saying a word, the short man punches the table, destroying it. Outside of the station, Greg says, and the man tells him, "My name is Frank Woodward, and everyone calls me the Mighty, but I'm here for you. There are a lot of superhero teams out there, but the fact of the matter is that being a superhero is a business. What happens if you suffer a debilitating injury, get sued, slapped with a paternity suit? We at the League of Defenders offer our support to you, sir. Take advantage of this offer and stop by the neighborhood outreach event tomorrow at the park. That way you can meet some of the others." After taking Frank's card, Greg tells him, I need to call my boss now. After Frank leaves, Greg takes out his phone and he calls his boss to let him know what happened, and he's promptly fired. So with nowhere else to go, Greg heads home to find his apartment completely destroyed. He takes out his phone to dial 911, and then Barry calmly walks out acting as if nothing happened. Greg starts to shout, asking what happened, and Barry tells him, "You happened! I just knew you would come around. The reporters came to the door begging for the Man of Stone." Greg says, "Wait, they stormed to the place?" And Barry laughs, "No, I had to search every square inch of this place to give them pictures, report cards, love letters, all of that to satisfy them." Barry takes a seat telling him that they need to go over some stuff like costumes and me being your sidekick. "We gotta ride this out for a couple of weeks and get paid." Greg shouts, "I am not a superhero. In fact, I'm having a nervous breakdown." Barry tells him, "I've been there. It's totally overrated. But all we gotta do is let this go on for a bit. Get the front page in the newspapers. It'll be something to tell the grandkids." Over at the League of Defenders, Mighty goes over the day's agenda, and as he's wrapping up, he mentions that the field agents have made a positive ID. Stingray, the supervillain, is back in town. Atlantis asks who's that, and Mighty then pulls out the images on the screen, stating that she's a beautiful girl, just not on the inside. She was supremely talented, and Princess Power tells her, "Yeah, and supremely effed up." Atlantis then asks, "So what happened to her?" And the Iron Giant quickly says that they failed. Later, Greg stops by the video store to return the game, and Kathy runs up hugging him, telling him thank you for saving her. He tells her, "Yeah, anybody would have done the same. Ow, bruises." She then asks if he's a breast or a thigh man. Greg asks, "What?" And Kathy laughs, telling him she's making chicken parmesan for him tonight. Greg asks, "Is it a family recipe?" And Kathy says that she bought a whole case of ragu at Costco. But before the two of them can enjoy their moment, reporters flock to the door shouting for Kathy to kiss her savior. Before Greg can even ask, he sees Barry in the back giving him a thumbs up. After getting away from the reporters, Greg then asks Barry what the hell was that, and he tells the publicity guy that they need to start working on a sidekick. Greg says that they can't keep doing this, and Barry says that it'll cheer him up, and then he pulls out a smartphone. Greg screams, and as he takes the phone, he asks, "Why did you tell him we have a meeting at 3? And Barry says, "It's your new agent. Aren't I the best sidekick ever, or what?" So later at the agency office, Richard tells Greg that he loved what he did at Best Buy, and Greg says that actually was just a video rental store. Richard cuts him off, telling him, "Bottom line, nobody cares about superheroes like you. No one also generates income for superheroes like me." Greg points at the wall, stating, "You represent the fire guy?" And Richard says, "Jack Blaze, hotter than McDonald's coffee, for him right out of high school." Greg then points at another picture, asking, "Who's that?" And Richard tells him that that's Stingray. "I don't represent her anymore. Philosophical differences." Richard then says, look, give it some thought. Talk to your friends. Hell, talk to your competitors. I'll help you live the dream, kid." Later, Greg heads over to his sister-in-law, Nancy's, in her chiropractor's office to have his back looked. She asks what exactly happened, and Greg jokes, stating that his brother Frederick isn't the only Pincus who played football. Nancy tells him, right, the bullet to the sternum might also be a contributing factor. Greg then asks if his parents heard, and Nancy says, judging by his mother's tears, she would have to say yes. That, and he's also making Frederick insane. He actually went out to get his blood tested to see if he had a mutant gene or something, which she says makes Frederick believe that this whole thing's made up anyway. As Nancy begins to crack down on Greg's back, he asks, "What would you do if you were me? You know, bigger picture stuff." And she tells him that she's pretty certain that every one of them is entitled to a secret, assuming nobody gets hurt. Back with Richard, he gets ready to leave for the day, but when he gets into his car, he hears a voice. He snaps back to see Stingray sitting there, and he asks her, "What the hell are you doing?" And Stingray laughs, asking, "What? You don't remember the fun we used to have in motor vehicles?" Richard then says, "You should have called. Warned me you were in town." Stingray says, "Interesting choice of words. If I had called, your assistance would have put me through as a low priority, and that would have hurt my feelings." Stingray starts to get out, and Richard asks if she needs anything, like a job or a sponsor, and Stingray tells him no. Dad has it covered. Richard then asks, So what now? And Stingray says, go crawling back to the League of Defenders. Beg for forgiveness. Never venture from the path of righteousness again. And Richard says, that's good. But Stingray laughs, telling him, that just proves how little you know. Richard tells you, you're right. Why did you ever hook up with Fenangali in the first place? Why run away from people who loved you? Please enlighten me. And Stingray quietly says, how do you cross the line when the line's been washed? And Richard asks, what? She turns to leave, so Richard grabs her shoulder, telling her that he's sorry, he just wants her to. But Stingray spins back, slamming her palm into Richard's face, telling him that she doesn't care what he wants. The next day at the park, Greg and Barry head to it to try and get into shape, and Greg notices Barry isn't doing that much really. Barry says, hey, my size is going to be my calling. And then a group of men ask if they're almost done with the field. Barry doesn't even look at them and says, no, it's a public park. Plus, you don't want to make me angry. Now do ya? The man leading the group looks over and sees Greg running laps, and he says, hey, I know that guy. All of you superheroes think that you're some kind of chosen ones or something. Barry tells him no, and the man tells him, well, in the animal kingdom, dragon beats tiger every single time. As the men begin to chase Barry, Greg crawls to home plate and he looks up asking where did everyone go. Meanwhile, over at the pier, a group of janitors get to work cleaning, and one of the men tells the other to be very liberal with the accelerant. The man then digs his mop into the bucket. He begins to wash the floors. Elsewhere, Greg rides the bus home and he hears his phone go off. As he answers, Desiree tells him to just text her his address. She'll drop the keys off. Greg tells her, yeah, well, he had a nice time the other morning, minus the whole pepper spray thing, and Desiree tells him that she did too. And then as someone starts to cough, she says that she needs to go. As she hangs up, she leans over to wipe the drool off of her father's mouth, telling him that he's okay now. And across the room is a picture of Desiree when she was younger, with her superhero father. Later at the beach by the pier, Greg and Kathy sit on a blanket. Kathy tells him thanks for bringing the game back in time, but she does have to ask him something. Was it weird? Greg says, what do you mean? And she goes on telling him, when you realized you had a gift. Greg leans back telling her, weird isn't the word, more like scary, but it's not like I don't fear other things. In fact, there's plenty of things that still scare me. Kathy says she too is scared of things like getting lost in a crowd, lost in translation, lost in someone's shadow. After dinner, Greg and Kathy enjoy the attractions of the pier when suddenly there's an explosion, and in the middle of it, an armored truck full of money. Fire burns away at the wood, causing the truck to fall into the waters below. People begin to scream for help, and Kathy looks at Greg, telling him, come on, you gotta do something, man of stone. But before he can move, Mighty and the other League of Defender members arrive on the scene, and Atlantis quickly jumps into the water. He swims down to pull the truck driver out of his seat, and he brings him back to the surface, and then he dives right back in. Back in the water, Atlantis looks around to make sure that no one else is trapped, and he begins to swim back up. But as he leaves, Stingray swims over, putting a strap around the truck, and she begins to swim off. Before he gets too far, the line is pulled, and Atlantis swims back, freeing the truck. The two struggle back and forth, but after Atlantis lands a clean hit, Stingray reaches out and snaps Atlantis' neck. As the lifeless body sinks, Stingray stares with a look of what did she just do? She screams, and then she swims over to the truck and begins to take the money out, leaving Atlantis there. Back on the pier, Mighty spots the second man, and he shouts that someone needs to stop him. With no one else around, Greg charges through the crowd, tackling the man down into the water. Everyone cheers, and they clap. As the EMTs get there, Iron walks with Atlantis holding his hand, and Princess tells him that he needs to let go. While the reporters arrive to take their pictures, Kathy watches Greg from a distance and then heads back home alone. The next day, Greg tells his boss thanks for letting him come back, and Mofield tells him that he intends on making it public the fact that he works here. And Greg asks him, is that really necessary? But while Greg is off getting his job back, Desiree stops by the apartment where Barry is now wearing an eye patch after getting beat up in the park. She asks if Greg is there, and Barry tells her no. He's off saving the world. So Desiree tosses the keys, stating, just have Greg call her when he gets back. Barry says that he should be home any minute if she'd like, and as Barry pats the couch, Desiree says that she'll stand. Meanwhile, back in town, Greg heads out to meet with his family for dinner, except he's wearing a hat and sunglasses to try and hide himself. He's become rather famous. As he sits at the table, Greg's father says the pull-down hat and dark glasses look good on him, and Greg's brother Frederick says that the Unabomber wore the same outfit. As everyone lost their minds. Back outside of the diner, a man reports that the Rock is in the walk, and I have a clean shot. And there you have it, the book Indestructible by Darby Pop Publishing. I'm going to give you all the links down below so you can acquire this book yourself. This one is a truly independent book. It's harder to find than many others, so I'm going to give you as many links as I can so you can find it if you enjoy this book. And if you're curious, this is also the same company that brought you the Sidekicked book a long time ago, telling you the story of sidekicks and how they got pushed to the side and needed to be treated. If you enjoyed it, I'm going to give you Sidekicked right over here so you can check that one out yourself, and you can get something recommended by YouTube right over here. And as somebody pointed out, my fingers never line up with what I'm saying I'm pointing at because I always just put the boxes up there and forget to look at where I was pointing. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you next time right here at Comicstorian.